Testing 1 2 3 sound check. Hello, mic test. Hello, testing 1 2 3 sound check. Microphone test. Hello, testing 1 2 3 sound check. Hello, sound check. Testing 1 2 3. Testing 1 2 3 sound check. 1 2 3. Testing 1 2 3 sound check. 1 2 3. Papoy na dungog imo ang voice. Testing 1 2 3 sound check. 1 2 3. Papoy na dungog imo ang voice. Testing 1 2 3 sound check. 1 2 3. Papoy na dungog imo ang voice. Papayo sa pa madungog ba imong voice. Wala pa ko nag-announce. Pero mag-type na ako karon nga mag-online nang mag-live stream ako. Okay, so we're here again in Kerbal Space Program, and a few hours ago, I stumbled upon the news that Scale Composites just tested the engines of this unique aircraft that they created. This aircraft is designed to take uh, a spaceship or a rocket up into the upper atmosphere and release it and launch it from there. So it's basically like a mothership of sorts. It's very similar to, if you're familiar with that other spacecraft and launcher system, if you recall, uh, Composites earlier uh, duo of ships, the White Knight and Spaceship One. Uh, Spaceship One, of course, is one of the first privately owned craft or vehicle that managed to exit the Earth's atmosphere and do a suborbital hop in space. And the person who was awarded one of the first civilian astronaut or commercial astronaut wings was Mike Melville. So I think he did that feat sometime in, if I'm not mistaken, I now forget the exact date, sometime in 2004, I believe, when that feat was accomplished. So uh, I think uh, Scale Composites actually won the Ansari X Prize to when they achieved that goal of sending a um, a ship up out into space, but not using a conventional rocket. But the rocket would be released via a carrier vehicle that would bring it up into the atmosphere, high above the Earth's atmosphere, up in the stratosphere. And then once the spacecraft is dropped, it would then launch out into space. So that concept basically tries to do away with the lower stages of a rocket. So basically, the carrier aircraft, the aircraft that would carry the rocket up into the atmosphere, would be stage one, essentially. And thus, the actual rocket or vehicle that would be carried or slung underneath the carrier or the mothership would be a lighter craft, because most of the fuel for the initial stage, I mean for the ascent up to that target at altitude, let's say around 10 kilometers up or 20 kilometers up, would be expended by the mothership. So, but of course, it would take a longer amount of time for the mothership to reach that altitude. So it would slowly enter into a pattern, perhaps a helical pattern of trying to ascend to that altitude. And once it reaches that target altitude, it would release the craft, the spaceship or the rocket, and the rocket would now proceed up into orbit, whatever its mission is, whether it's a suborbital flight or an actual orbital flight around the Earth. So, um, Scale Composites has advanced considerably ever since those days. They're now developing White Knight 2, which will be carrying Spaceship 2, which is, again, the... Wait a minute, I'm also a bit confused there, because that venture is actually under Virgin Galactic, which is headed by Richard Branson. Virgin Airlines. The CEO of Virgin Airlines is also the owner of Virgin Galactic, who plans to send um, ordinary human beings, not necessarily astronauts, ordinary civilians. But of course, the catch is the ticket price is quite expensive, somewhere between $150,000 to $200,000 per ticket, which is still quite cheap if you think about it. So, with the Spaceship 2, which was supposed to be doing test launches this year, but I don't know, so far we haven't heard from them. Probably because there was actually an accident, I think a couple of years ago, or maybe 1 year ago, wherein Spaceship Two was undergoing some launch testing, and unfortunately, during that launch test, the feathering mechanism for its tail accidentally deployed, and because of that, um, the aircraft practically disintegrated while while flying, and it killed. Unfortunately, it killed one of the Virgin Galactic test pilots. The other one survived. He parachuted down safely. So, without further ado, we are actually. What I did was I'm actually simulating not the White Knight 2 carrier, but there's a brand new carrier that's being developed by Scale Composites. It's much, much larger. This carrier, is perhaps one of the largest aircrafts ever built, or is still going to be built. It's not yet finished. Uh, it surpasses the wingspan of the Spruce Goose or even the Airbus A380. The current wingspan measurement of this craft is 117 meters. It's not as long as the other big craft like the Spruce Goose or a 747, for instance. It's only around 75 meters long, but the wingspan is 117 meters. It's a very huge aircraft, and you can search for it in the web. It's called the Scaled Composites Stratolaunch. So the Stratolaunch is what I tried to replicate inside the Kerbal Space Program. So that's what we're going to check out right now. I'm going to start. I'm not going to show you how I constructed it, but I'm going to show you why it was difficult to actually come up with this craft. It's quite challenging because of certain reasons, and I will show you why. So we're loading up as you can see, I'm still using the same save file from last time. I called it live stream. So we're not going to enter VAB this time. We're going to enter the spaceplane hangar because Stratolaunch or the Stratolauncher is an aircraft. It requires air, or it requires the Earth's atmosphere for it to function or to actually fly or to take off. So I made one, and here it is. I made several iterations of this craft, but this is the one so far that really, I mean, it worked really well. So this is the one that actually flew properly. Maybe I can show you my initial design. So one of the first designs I made looks like this. So maybe I can show you that. Where is that? Carrier B, Carrier 1A. Okay, so this was my initial design. So as you can see, it's basically like two separate aircraft, and they're sharing one wing in one side, this part. So it's like two aircraft fuselages, and they have been joined together at the wing over here. So they're identical, and on either side of the craft are the engines. So in my initial design, I opted to use these really large engines, and the problem with these engines is even though they provided a huge amount of thrust, they are quite dependent on air. I mean, they only work well in lower altitudes. When you reach around 10,000 10,000 meters up in Kerbin atmosphere, it starts to falter, meaning it's not as powerful in terms of thrust when it's flying at a much lower altitude than 10,000 meters. So that's why I was very disappointed with the design, because the objective of such a carrier is it's supposed to like lift up a rocket to a certain altitude and at a certain speed so that it can take advantage of that altitude and speed to jump off from. It's basically a platform by which it's going to jump into space. So if you're going to create a craft just like this and you cannot reach a substantial altitude and substantial speed, then it's almost like you're wasting money and energy building a craft like this, and it's not really going to help your rocket. You know, the vehicle that's supposed to launch into space. So, identifying that my problem was lifting surfaces. So as you can see, it was only relying on this wing, and this is also a lifting surface, by the way, the one near the center, because they are still wings. Okay, there's an airfoil there, although it's not represented well. So it's a lifting surface, but it's not enough. So even if the engines are indeed powerful, because if we inspect this engine, you can see the thrust rating is, stationary thrust is 360 kilonewtons. So you multiply that by 4, and that's basically the total thrust, plus these two tiny engines that I placed in the tail. It's like a DC-10 configuration, so it also helps push it along. However, I found out that the thrust it's generating is still not enough. Furthermore, I opted to change the cockpits, because here, although only actually in real life only one of the cockpits is occupied, I believe they put ballast on the other cockpit in the real strato line. I mean strato what do you call it again? It's the strato launch. In the real strato launch, I think they put some additional electronic gear on one of the cockpits, and the pilots actually only occupy yeah, the cockpits. I was not happy with the way it looked like. It's because it still resembled. I mean, it's still a bit flat. Unlike in the real strato launch, they're quite pointy. So after several iterations, I came up with the one I showed you earlier, which is Carrier 3A, and here it is. So as you notice, the wingspan is considerably longer because I opted to use these panels in order to extend the wing further out. And if you also notice, I changed the engine to smaller ones, but these are actually, even though they're less powerful, I chose this one, the Whiplash turbo ramjet engine. Even though it's much less powerful at only 130 kilonewtons, it has several advantages in that it's actually a better engine when you try to fly it in the upper atmosphere. And it actually works better there because it transitions into something called a ramjet, meaning from an ordinary turbojet or turbofan engine, it automatically detects that the atmospheric pressure is low. So what it does is it actually like um, it's similar to almost like a rocket. Actually, I can read it to you here. The advanced turbo ramjet design breathes air around the compressor at high speed, allowing a far maximum speed than regular jet engines. So meaning, to make a long story short, these engines actually work better at higher speeds and higher altitudes. So that's the reason why I chose them. And I wasn't content to use just 3 or 6. I actually got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and times 2 because there's another 6 on the other side. So you have 12 engines. So there's 12 engines for this for my version of the Strato launch. Okay, I keep getting confused. The name is actually awkward. I don't like it. And here, sitting in the middle, is of course our test rocket, or it's just like a dummy rocket that I created for test purposes, because I had to test whether it could carry a substantial weight, and of course this weight is quite substantial. It's quite a big rocket, as you can see. The diameter is mimicking. I mean, the size mimics the size of the external fuel tank of the space shuttle. Remember, the space launch system of NASA. So that's a fuel tank, and it has actually like just this automated stabilizing system, and it has an engine. This engine has the ability to push this rocket to orbit, or in this case, just a suborbital flight. The reason behind this is, the reason why I can only attempt a suborbital for this rocket that's being carried is because Kerbal Space Program is actually not a very good simulator, in the sense that it can only simulate one event at a time, meaning one accurate event. What I mean by this is, if you're flying a spaceship and suddenly it releases another craft that's flyable, and the two craft suddenly separates a considerable amount of distance, the program is going to force you to choose which spacecraft to prioritize, meaning it's going to abandon or even erase sometimes the other craft because it's a singular simulation. It only wants to simulate one craft. So because of the difficulty in simulating all the physics involved, I think that's the reason why the programmers of Kerbal Space Program opted to just abandon the other craft when the two crafts separate. So that's the dilemma. Once this rocket, the payload separates, it can still fly to where it's supposed to head. Unfortunately, I cannot switch over to it to when it reaches apogee. I want to circularize it. It would be difficult because the program won't allow it. I cannot also leave the Strato launcher behind because it's going to crash, especially if it's going to be piloted. In this case, it's piloted by I think I lost some of the astronauts. Maybe we can just, these are not pilots, so maybe I can just maybe I'll just get one pilot, Sammy Kerman. Yeah, Sammy, you have been hired. So let's go back to assigned. Oh, Valentine is already assigned, but maybe I forgot to get her. But anyway, Sammy is here, so we're gonna get Sammy. And then Sammy will be, not Bill. Bill's an engineer, so Sammy will be our pilot. And I think he'll be sitting here. So since it's a manned aircraft, and you have to pilot it back to back to the space center, in order for you to reuse it again to launch. Especially this is quite an expensive vehicle. Even in real life, of course, scale composites must be spending a lot. I mean, just to get that huge craft off the ground. Anyway, you might be wondering what these objects are. These objects that look like, what are they? These are actually takes, and you might wonder why there's so many of them. I was forced to add more because at higher altitudes these engines tend to quit. That's because it's not being properly supplied with air. I mean, air in the upper atmosphere is thin, so therefore the engine would starve. It won't have any oxygen to do combustion in order to combust the fuel. So that's the reason why I had to add. In a way, it's almost like spamming it with air intakes just to get these engines still operating at above 20,000 meters, because that's the target. That was my target altitude for it. So without further ado, we're going to okay, one more thing. I want to explain why there's this, unlike in the real, if you're now viewing, if you check the internet for pictures of scale composites strato launch, you might notice that the wing in this central part is actually flushed, or there is no central knob like this cylindrical body here in the center. Now this thing serves two purposes for this particular, for my Kerbal Space Program build. Number one is, of course, it's a very convenient way for me to attach the decouplers or the attachment system for the payload. It's easier to like stick this into that cylindrical body compared to like just sticking this part onto that rectangular piece of lifting body there. I actually had trouble doing that, but with this cylindrical thing, it's actually better. But that's not actually the primary purpose. The thing is, it's very, very difficult to build a twin cockpit system in Kerbal Space Program. That is because the way that it builds, I will show you, the way that it builds a ship is in the case of an airplane, it tries to mirror, to make symmetric what you place in one side to the other side. And I can demonstrate that to you now. I'm going to, for instance, if I want to add a wing, let's say we want to add another wing. Okay, so here's another wing. If I wanted to add that wing on this side, so see, I can add that wing on this side and it will, wait, having trouble there. Let's just add a smaller one, maybe this one. So if I wanted to add this wing, it's just going to stick like that there. But it's only on one side, so I can actually just take another wing and drop it over here. But I cannot guarantee how symmetric it would be. The better way is to turn on mirroring. So there's called a mirror symmetry mode. So it's now in mirror mode. I can actually also change it to radial mode, which is better for rockets. But for airplanes, the symmetry is left and right. So that's why I'm going to toggle this on, left and right symmetry, so that when I add a wing at this side, notice that on the other side, a wing also appears. So that's how Kerbal lets you build vehicles. So the trouble is, you have to start from somewhere, like a central point, in order to build all of the parts. So that's the reason why I had to start here in the middle with this fuselage knob, because I couldn't start like from a cockpit here and build it and then mirror the cockpit there. It won't allow it. So that was the workaround for me in order to build this craft. And look, complete. And without further ado, let's fly it. Okay. So Valentina's other craft is there. I removed it. We're now going to the runway with another pilot. So take note, the payload, the rocket, is actually unmanned, but our craft is piloted by Sam and Kerman. Okay, so here's the craft on the runway, and if you notice, I'm using a joystick, and it's imperative that I use a joystick for this craft because it has very heavy controls. I mean, it can get very difficult to control it, especially during landing. So that's why I opted to attach the joystick. I can actually fairly fly Kerbal Space Program airplanes pretty well using the keyboard only. But in the case of this very large craft, I really had to use I had no choice but to use the joystick. Okay, so let's fire this thing up. So let's first set the throttle to 0 and activate all of the engines. Okay, it's already moving forward a bit. Maybe I should apply the brakes. As you can see, even the air brakes are being deployed when I apply the wheel brakes. So the reason why I'm applying the brakes right now is so that I can spool up the engines. These are jet engines, by the way, so they need time to like reach a very high RPM. So just like a real jet engine, and you can see it's an afterburning engine. And now I'm going to full throttle and release the brakes. And we're going to we're in a slight turn. I don't know why. I hope I can correct that as we go this runway. Okay dokie. Okay dokie. We need to reach a speed of around 170 meters per second for this thing to actually fly. Uh-oh, we're reaching the end of the runway there. I hope we can pull out. Okay, we can now pull up. There we go. Gear up. And let's maintain a heading of 90 degrees due east. Okie dokie. And let's try and maintain a climb angle of about 40 degrees, or maybe 35 will be enough. As you can see, even at this high an angle of attack, the airspeed is actually still quite picking up. That's because the engines that I chose are really good. They're very reliable. Maybe we should push the nose down a bit. That was almost 45 degrees there. Let's try a more gentle climb attitude. And I'm going to activate something called the SAS, or a system by which it can help me stabilize the craft while it ascends. Okie dokie. Okay, we're leaving the space center behind. We're in a slight bank to the left hand side, so we're going to roll towards the right. Starboard side, rolling back to port. Okay. I hope you can still hear my voice. The engines are quite loud. So, what's our target altitude? I don't know if I mentioned it before, but these engines will be starved of oxygen or air once we reach 25,000 meters. So, obviously, we have to level off at around 24,000 meters and then launch our rocket. Okay, so the way this rocket will be launched is once we release it, it's going to ignite the engines right away. So it's just like we're firing a huge missile, like we're firing a Sidewinder or a large Sparrow missile. So look at that, it's still increasing in altitude, both in altitude and in airspeed. And if you notice, there is some sort of aerodynamic effects going on with our craft. It's rock solid. If you notice, it's really great craft. It's not giving me any problems at all. So I'm now increasing climb or pitch up to about 40 or 35 degrees in the hopes that I can reach my target altitude faster. And if you notice, it's not really affecting the velocity too much. It's still quite high and it even increasing. I have to be careful though. Once that reaches something like 700 meters per second, I have to be careful of heating effects, because if I'm still low in the atmosphere, some parts of the craft might start to glow because of the friction of the surrounding air. So I have to be very careful. But so far so good. We're approaching 20,000 meters. So I have to be very careful now. In fact, I think, notice something? Did you notice that sound? That is the sound of the transitioning of the engines from a regular turbojet engine after burning turbojet into a ramjet. So now I believe it's acting like a ramjet. So we're going to slow down a bit. 23. Okay, I need to push down the nose a bit. 24. Uh-oh. We are going to... Okay, we need to release it now. I'm going to pitch up and... There we go. There goes our... See? There goes our rocket there. Wow, look at that. It's going up there. And what happened? Why did our engine stop? Well, look. The altitude is 26,000 meters, 27 even. So it's still climbing actually. And our rocket, we can actually switch to our rocket here. And maybe even play around with its attitude. I can still actually switch to it because it's still within. There is a limit to the distance that you can actually switch between the two because of Kerbal's problem with the physics of each engine. Quite silent right now because our craft doesn't have any power I mean, there is no air coming into the air intakes anymore. It's quite thin up here. So that's why we have to wait until it actually reaches its own apogee. And by that time, look, the payload is now 30 plus kilometers away. Wow. Let's see where it is now if we monitor it here in the map mode. Oh, look, that sound is the engines coming back to life. But look, our rocket is well on its way up into Kerbin atmosphere. I mean, outside of Kerbin atmosphere. In fact, if this rocket had a computer that tells it to fire prograde once it reaches apogee, it's actually going to orbit around Kerbin. But this time around, it's just a suborbital hop. Something Kim Jong-un might like. Why do I say Kim Jong-un? It's because this thing can actually be like a launcher for intercontinental ballistic missiles, right? So yeah, a strategic bomber of sorts. So I am going on a 180-degree U-turn so that we can get back to our space center. So first, in order for the stresses not to affect our craft too much, I'm going to deploy the brakes in the hopes that these aerodynamic forces can get really stressful on the craft. So I'm going to apply brakes even though we're at quite high in altitude. The air up here is quite thin, but still, look, the airspeed is dropping quite rapidly. Let's accelerate him so that, don't worry, I can still manage to fly this thing even in accelerated time. Takes I have uber skills in Kerbal. Joke only. Okay, so now our heading is somewhere around 315. So we need to point back to west, which is 270. There we go. And now I'm going to increase engines, increase thrust. Maybe increase altitude around 12,000 feet. I mean 12,000 meters. The mountains is where our space center is located, near those mountains. I need to change heading again a bit. So we're not going to, well, let's try landing. Yeah, I haven't tried landing towards the west, so let's try that. I'm going to try and land. There's no wind, so therefore I can choose which runway end I would land in. So just to save time, instead of going around, I'm going to just do a straight in landing from this heading. I mean towards 270. At this point, I might need to wear my glasses because I cannot really see the runway orientation. Okay, I'm not sure if I'm aligned with the runway. Okay, let's extend the brakes. You can actually fly this thing like a regular aircraft by switching over to internal view, and I'll try that in a few moments from now. Let's release the brakes. I wanted to maintain something like 100 meters per second. We're still in accelerated mode, by the way. Okay, let's align our view. I'm a bit skewed. The approach is skewed. And I want to show you how it looks like from the cockpit. So there. If we're in this view, it's like flying a regular, regular aircraft, like a flight simulator. There, I can even make out the lines on the runway. So I think this is a very good approach. As long as we maintain this heading and we maintain a good rate of descent, then we're going to do a nice landing on the runway. My only problem right now, my only issue is because I'm live streaming to you, I am having some stutters in my frame rate, so that would impact whether I would be landing this thing in a nice way. Look, there's a bug here, and as you notice, only part of my landing gear actually deployed. And that is because there's something wrong with the way this thing deploys. There's something called deploy shielded. So I have to like deploy these landing gear manually. Oh man, will we make it in time? Come on, deploy shielded and extend. Okay, and you also, where's the other one? Extend, man. Man, that was just like pumping your landing gear, just like in the F4F Wildcat, the World War II fighter. Okay, so we're 110 meters per second. I'm not sure if this is a good rate of descent. Let's go into the cockpit again. Uh-oh, not a very good angle now. So I'm going to try and switch again. The command of the ailerons is not very good, so I am having difficulty in rolling the aircraft. And due to its huge size, it's very sluggish. It feels very difficult to like find an optimal roll rate. You feel like you want to make it roll faster, but you shouldn't, because once it starts rolling in a certain direction, it's very difficult because of its size. The the inertia of that roll will tend to let it keep on rolling. Okay, maybe a good approach would be something like 80 meters per second. How about that? Still a skewed approach. Oh my god, not very good. I am going to try and bank more. Yes, let's just hope that I can actually bank. Oh no, this is not very good. So since I missed this approach, I think I'm just gonna turn around. I'm just going to land from that other side because my approach was bad. I got quite sweaty there because my approach got skewed, which is strange because in KSP there's no air, so it's almost like there was a crosswind. I'm really annoyed by the stuttering I'm experiencing right now, because usually when I'm not streaming and I'm just flying along in Kerbal Space Program, there's no stutter. Okay, I'm going to cheat a bit by allowing the craft to actually roll. I mean the elevator should roll now too, to allow me there more roll command. I was having difficulty in maintaining my my bank angle back there. That's why I'm going to get the assistance of the elevator for rolling, and hopefully this time around we can actually have a good approach to runway 9, which is bearing 90. Okay, speed up time a bit so that you won't have to wait a lot. Okay, now let's do a turning descent. Okay, so I'm going to descend while turning now. towards the port side. I'm going to turn on my air brakes because we're approaching at a quite steep angle. So this will ensure that we won't build up a lot of speed as we descend and do a turn as we come up to the end of runway 9. Okay, let's remove the air brakes. And yeah, I have a better roll command right now, so I hope this will really work. The micro stutters are really annoying me. This could be the reason why I could crash this thing while on landing. It's not fluid because of the fact that I'm live streaming right now. There's some the encoding mechanism. The encoding mechanism of the stream is the culprit. It's the one causing these micro stutters and lag on my screen here. Okay, you know what? I'm just gonna wing it. I'm not really gonna hope for a good landing because I can't. I mean, with these micro stutters, it's almost hopeless to hope for a good landing. Really have a difficult time here. It's almost uncontrollable, actually. Well, there's still hope. But look, I'm still coming in skewed. It's very difficult to align this thing, especially with these micro stutters going on. Look, my nose, and there's absolutely no way for me. For some reason, man, we're gonna die. We're gonna die. Wow. Oh man. Ah. Our turbo is dead, I think, because his cockpit crashed. Well, lesson. I did not anticipate that those micro stutters would really be a factor in my landing, because I did land it one time, and to prove to you that I did it before is I can actually just record the whole thing and show you that it's actually quite landable. But at that moment you saw the nose going down. There was absolutely no way for my controller to catch up because of the lag in order to like pull it up. So at least we managed to get back, even we failed at landing this thing. Wait a minute, let's try to check the map. And I think our payload also crashed into the sea already. So there. So despite this horrible landing, I hope what was that? There's something crazy going on over there. Despite this failed landing, at least I was able to demonstrate this craft that tries to replicate the, what is that again? The strato launch system by scaled composites. So that's it. I hope you enjoyed this hilarious crashing session once again with Kerbal Space Program. So that ends my stream. I can end it now. And baboosh. Stop.